She was a virgin and innocent, but her own father sold her to be a bride. On the wedding night, the millionaire drank too much and took something from her that could never be returned. Watch until the end to see how a night meant for love became their greatest trauma and ultimate redemption. If you love stories of love and romance, stick around, subscribe to this channel, and comment where you're watching from. Stay tuned. The helicopter cut through the New York City sky like a black blade against the gray afternoon clouds. Ryan Kingsley watched the city sprawl endlessly through the bulletproof glass, each building representing an empire built on blood and concrete. At 32, he had already learned that power wasn't won with kindness, but with closed fists and armored hearts. The Kingsley conglomerate erected skyscrapers around the world, but what no one knew was that Ryan built walls inside himself. Brick by brick, since he was just a frightened boy. His mother, Helen, had been the most beautiful woman in all of Manhattan's high society, blonde like ripe wheat, eyes blue as sapphires, crystalline laughter that echoed through the halls of their mansion in the Hamptons. But Ryan's father, Victor Kingsley, was a man of insatiable appetites. Mistresses, dirty business, betrayals that bled through newspaper pages like open wounds. Ryan grew up watching his mother silently wither away, transforming into a shadow that wandered the corridors of the house like a ghost of silk and tears. At 15, she was admitted to a private psychiatric clinic in Vermont. She never came home again. That day, Victor had called his son for a meeting in the office on the top floor of the corporate building. The gray-haired man with eyes as hard as stone drummed his fingers on the mahogany desk while talking about Theodore Marshall's situation, one of the country's largest real estate investors who had become involved in financial scandals. Money laundering, tax evasion, fraudulent contracts. The list of crimes was as long as a rosary of sins. Theodore was desperate, on the verge of bankruptcy and prison. "He offered me something in exchange for debt forgiveness and our silence," said Victor, lighting a Cuban cigar. His daughter, Elizabeth Marshall, 25 years old, never married, educated at the best schools, a family girl, perfect for consolidating our social position. Ryan felt something cold run down his spine. "Are you talking about an arranged marriage? That's medieval, Dad." "This is business," Victor replied coldly. "You need a wife who brings respectability to the Kingsley name, and she needs a husband who will save her from poverty and shame. It's a fair transaction." The word transaction echoed in Ryan's mind like a gunshot. He knew that cruel world where people were bargaining chips, where love was a luxury men like them couldn't afford. He had sworn never to marry, never to allow a woman to become his weakness, as his mother had been for his father. But the pressure of business, the need to clean up the family's reputation after some recent scandals, all conspired against his resistance. "When will I meet her?" he asked, his voice coming out hoarser than intended. "Tomorrow, dinner at the Marshall's house. She doesn't know anything yet. Theodore wants you to meet naturally before revealing the agreement." Victor smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. "Wear your best suit, son. You're about to meet your future wife." That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He stood on the balcony of his penthouse on Park Avenue, watching the city lights twinkle like fallen stars. He felt like a cornered animal, trapped in a snare he himself had helped build by accepting to be part of that world of power and cruelty. He thought of his mother, how she had been sacrificed on the altar of his father's business, and a deaf rage began to burn in his chest. But at the same time, a morbid curiosity consumed him. Who was Elizabeth Marshall? What would the woman be like who was about to be handed to him as payment for a debt? Would she be an opportunist, like so many others he had met, or an innocent victim about to be devoured by wolves? The phone rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. It was his personal assistant, confirming the dinner details. The Marshall house was in Greenwich, Connecticut, an old mansion surrounded by gardens that were once grand, but now showed signs of decay. Like the family itself, Ryan thought bitterly. When the sun rose over New York, painting the sky in orange hues, Ryan had already made his decision. He would go to that dinner, meet Elizabeth Marshall, and do whatever was necessary to protect the family's interests. But one thing he knew for certain: he would never allow that woman, whoever she was, to become more than a convenient alliance. His heart would remain locked, protected by walls that even he didn't know how to tear down. The Marshall mansion stood like a monument to a glorious past, but the cracks in the walls and the peeling paint betrayed the decay that had set in like a silent cancer. Ryan parked his black Porsche in the circular driveway, observing the gardens that must have once been magnificent, now overrun with weeds and wild rose bushes growing without direction. It was like looking at a kingdom in ruins, and he was there to crown himself king over the rubble. Theodore Marshall greeted him at the main door, a 60-year-old man trying to hide his desperation behind a forced smile. His grey hair was perfectly combed, his Italian suit still impeccably cut, but Ryan could smell the fear on his skin, sour like cold sweat. They greeted each other with handshakes that were too firm, like gladiators measuring strength before the fight. "Ryan, my boy, what a pleasure to welcome you to our home," said Theodore, guiding him through corridors decorated with old paintings and furniture that probably cost fortunes in better times. "Elizabeth is waiting for us in the library. She loves to read, you know. A very cultured young lady, educated at the finest European schools." With each word, Ryan felt the disgust grow in his throat. Theodore was selling his own daughter as if she were prize cattle, highlighting her qualities like an experienced merchant. But when they arrived at the library, everything Ryan had mentally prepared disintegrated the moment he saw her. Elizabeth Marshall was sitting in a burgundy leather armchair, a book of Italian poetry open in her lap. She looked up when they entered, and Ryan felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. It wasn't her classic beauty that impressed him, though she was beautiful, with wavy brown hair that fell over her shoulders and honey-colored eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. It was something deeper, more dangerous, a melancholy that he instantly recognized, as if he were looking into a distorted mirror. She rose gracefully, closing the book carefully, and Ryan noticed how her fingers trembled slightly. She wore a simple navy blue dress without ostentatious jewelry, and there was something almost monastic about her appearance, as if she were a novice about to take her vows. When she smiled, the smile didn't reach her eyes, and Ryan immediately understood that she knew. Perhaps not the details of the agreement, but she knew she was being evaluated, measured, weighed on an invisible scale. "Elizabeth, dear, this is Ryan Kingsley," Theodore introduced. "Ryan, my daughter, Elizabeth." She extended her hand, and when Ryan touched it, he felt as if he had been electrocuted. Her skin was soft, but her hands were cold as marble. She greeted him with a low, almost whispered voice, and Ryan realized that she had a slight European accent, probably the result of years of education abroad. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Kingsley," she said, and there was a resignation in her voice that made something twist in Ryan's chest. Dinner was served in the main dining room, a huge table that could accommodate 20 people, but that night seemed too vast for just 3. Theodore dominated the conversation, talking about business, about the family's glory days, about properties they still owned, thinly veiled lies to impress. Elizabeth ate in silence, cutting her food into tiny pieces, chewing slowly, as if each forkful were a sacrifice. Ryan observed her discreetly, trying to decipher her. She was different from all the women he had met in the business world. There was no calculation in her eyes, no attempt at seduction or manipulation. When Theodore asked about her interests, she replied that she enjoyed gardening, especially cultivating roses and reading classical poetry, hobbies so innocent, so pure, that they seemed absurd in that context of corruption and greed. "Elizabeth dreams of having her own garden," said Theodore, and Ryan saw how she shrank slightly in her chair, as if her father had exposed something. "Too intimate. She spends hours tending to the flowers here at home, has fairy hands for making things grow." After dinner, Theodore created an excuse to leave, an urgent business call, leaving Ryan and Elizabeth alone on the terrace overlooking the back garden. The silence stretched between them like an abyss, filled only by the sound of crickets and wind in the leaves of ancient trees. "He lied about several things during dinner," Elizabeth suddenly said, without looking at Ryan. "The properties he said we still have were sold last month. The car in the garage will be taken by creditors next week." Ryan was surprised by her frankness. "Why are you telling me this?" She finally faced him, and Ryan saw unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "Because I imagine you already know that I am part of some kind of negotiation. I don't know the details, but I know my father, and I know desperation." Her brutal honesty completely disarmed him. Ryan had expected theater, manipulative tears, dramatic pleas. Instead, he found a woman who faced her fate with a dignity that made him feel small and dirty. "Elizabeth, he began, but didn't know how to continue, how to explain that she was right, that she was just a piece in a game that men like them played with human lives. "You don't need to explain," she said softly. "Just answer one thing. Are you cruel by nature or by necessity?" The question hit him like a bullet. Ryan was silent for a long moment, observing how the moonlight illuminated her face, highlighting the delicate bones, the vulnerable curve of her neck. When he finally answered, his voice came out hoarser than intended. "I don't know the difference anymore." 3 weeks after. That dinner, Ryan still couldn't get Elizabeth out of his head. His honest answer about no longer knowing the difference between cruelty by nature or necessity had created a crack in his armor that he didn't know how to repair. He tried to immerse himself in work, approving billion-dollar projects, closing contracts that changed entire skylines, but he always returned to that image of her on the terrace, bathed in moonlight, asking him about his nature as if she really cared about the answer. Victor had scheduled a decisive meeting with Theodore for that morning. The Kingsley Patriarch's office was tenser than usual, with documents scattered across the desk and an expression of impatience stamped on his wrinkled face. When Ryan entered, he found Theodore already seated, thinner and paler than he remembered, as if the last few weeks had sucked years from his life. "We need to resolve this today," Victor declared without preamble. "The IRS is breathing down Theodore's neck, and our lawyers can only hold off the lawsuits for a few more weeks. Either we close the deal now, or he goes to prison, and we lose both the money and the opportunity." Theodore nodded, his hands trembling, slightly as he adjusted the papers in front of him. "Elizabeth knows everything. I spoke with her last night. She agreed." The words sounded like a funeral bell in Ryan's ears. He had spent the last few weeks trying to find a way out, a way to save the family business without sacrificing that woman on the altar of convenience. But time had run out, and now she was officially being handed to him as payment for a debt. "How did she react?" asked Ryan, surprised by his own interest. "As she always reacts to everything," Theodore replied with a tired sigh. With that silent resignation, said she would rather marry a man of dubious character than see her father in prison. He paused, looking directly at Ryan. Her words, not mine. Ryan felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. Anger, admiration, guilt. Elizabeth had called his character dubious, and the worst part was that she was right. He had become exactly the type of man who used others' suffering as currency. "She put only one condition," Theodore continued. "She wants the wedding to be held in the Maldives. Said if she's going to marry out of obligation, at least let it be in a beautiful place. Apparently she's always dreamed of seeing the Indian Ocean." Victor rolled his eyes. "Woman's whim. But if that's what she wants, we can arrange it. The important thing is that the wedding happens within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Ryan felt as if he had received a death sentence. Or maybe Elizabeth was the one who had received the sentence, and he would be the executioner. The idea sickened him. But he couldn't find an alternative that wouldn't destroy everything his family had built. That afternoon, he went to the Marshall mansion without warning. He found Elizabeth in the back garden, kneeling before a bed of white roses, her hands dirty with soil and her simple dress stained with grass. She didn't see him approach, and Ryan spent a few moments observing how she cared for the flowers, with a tenderness that made his throat tighten. "They're beautiful," he said, announcing his presence. Elizabeth startled, turning to face him. There was soil on her cheek, and her hair was disheveled by the wind. She had never seemed more real, more human, more devastatingly beautiful. "Mr. Kingsley," she said, trying to stand up quickly and almost stumbling in the process. "I didn't know you were coming today." "Neither did I," admitted Ryan, extending his hand to help her up. I wanted to talk to you about what's going to happen." Elizabeth wiped her hands on her dress, leaving more soil stains on the fabric. "My father said you agreed to the marriage, that it will be in the Maldives." Her voice was controlled, but Ryan could see the tension in her shoulders. "Do you really want to get married there?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I've always dreamed of seeing the ocean," she answered simply. "I've read about the Maldives in books, seen pictures. It seems like a place where the world is different, cleaner." She paused, looking at her roses. "I thought that maybe, if I had to marry out of obligation, at least I could do it in a beautiful place, a beautiful memory, in an ugly situation." Her brutal honesty was like a slap in the face. Ryan felt dirty, small, a predator about to destroy something pure and innocent. "Elizabeth, I need you to know that I didn't want it to be this way, if there were another way." "But there isn't," she interrupted, finally facing him. "There is no other way, and we both know it. My father committed crimes. Your family has the power to destroy him or save him, and I am the price. It's a transaction like any other." "You are not a transaction," said Ryan, the words coming out with more force than intended. "Am I not?" she questioned, tilting her head. "Then tell me, Ryan Kingsley, what am I to you?" The question hung in the air between them like a sharp blade. Ryan opened his mouth to answer, but couldn't, because the truth was that he didn't know what she was to him. He only knew that she haunted him, that she had created a storm in his soul that he couldn't control. "I don't know," he finally admitted. Elizabeth nodded, as if she expected that answer. "At least you're honest. That's more than I expected." They were silent for a moment, the wind swaying the roses around them. Ryan wanted to say something, anything that could ease the situation, but all words seemed inadequate. "There's something I need to know," Elizabeth finally said. "After we're married, will you treat me as your wife or as your prisoner?" The question hit him like lightning. Ryan looked at her, at that woman who was being forced to marry a stranger to save her father, and realized that she wasn't asking for love or happiness. She was just asking to be treated with basic human dignity. "I'll try to be the best husband I can be," he answered, the words sounding like a heavy promise. Elizabeth smiled, but it was a sad smile, full of a wisdom that no one of 25 should possess. "Then maybe that's enough to start." The flight to the Maldives was an exercise in silent tension. Ryan had chartered his private jet, and Elizabeth spent most of the 14 hours looking out the window, watching the clouds transform into endless blue ocean. She had exchanged few words with him during the entire journey, responding to his attempts at conversation with polite monosyllables, as if she were already mentally preparing for what was to come. Ryan tried to work, but found himself observing her more than he should. She had chosen a simple white dress for the journey, and her hair was tied in a low bun that exposed the delicate curve of her neck. There was something almost ethereal about her, as if she were an apparition that might disappear if he blinked too hard. When she fell asleep during the flight, he found himself watching how her features softened, how her lips parted slightly, and felt a pang of something dangerous in his chest. The resort Ryan had reserved was exclusive even by Maldivian standards, a private island with only 5 villas suspended over the crystal-clear waters of the Indian Ocean. When they arrived, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed straight out of a dream. Elizabeth stepped off the seaplane and stood on the wooden platform, breathing deeply, eyes closed as if trying to absorb all that beauty. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," she said, the first complete sentence she had directed at him in hours. Ryan watched her as she walked across the bridge leading to the main villa, her bare feet touching the wood warmed by the sun. For the first time since he had met her, she seemed relaxed, almost happy. It was as if the ocean had washed away part of the sadness she carried on her shoulders. The ceremony would be the next day, an intimate celebration just for them and the witnesses who had flown in from New York. But that first night, Ryan decided to dine alone, giving Elizabeth the space she seemed to need. He stayed on the terrace of his villa, drinking whiskey and watching the waves lapping at the wooden pillars, trying to process the fact that in less than 24 hours he would be married to a woman he barely knew. Around 10 o'clock, he saw her walking along the resort's private beach. She had changed from her dress into a long white nightgown that fluttered in the wind, and her hair was loose, swaying with the sea breeze. Ryan went down to the beach and followed her at a distance, just to make sure she was safe, but when she sat down in the sand near the water, he couldn't resist approaching. "May I sit?" he asked. Elizabeth looked up, slightly surprised, but nodded. They sat side by side in the warm sand, listening to the hypnotic sound of the waves. The moon was full, creating a silver path over the water that seemed to lead to infinity. "Are you afraid?" Ryan suddenly asked. Elizabeth considered the question for a long moment. "Yes," she finally admitted, "but not of what you think." "Of what then?" "Of losing myself," she replied, wrapping her arms around her knees. "I've spent my entire life being the obedient daughter, doing what was expected of me, never questioning, never rebelling. And now I'm going to become the obedient wife of a man who doesn't love me and whom I don't love. I'm afraid that one day I'll look in the mirror and no longer recognize who I am." Ryan felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. He had thought she feared physical intimacy, life with a stranger, but she feared something much deeper, the loss of her own identity. "Elizabeth," he began, but she interrupted him. "Do you want to know something funny?" she said, laughing without humor. "When I was little, I used to dream about my wedding. I imagined a man who would look at me as if I were the most precious thing in the world, who would love me not despite who I am, but because of who I am, who would make me feel brave and strong and beautiful." She paused. "Childish, isn't it?" "No," said Ryan, his voice hoarser than intended. "It's not childish to want to be loved." Elizabeth looked at him with curiosity. "And you? Have you ever been in love?" The question caught him off guard. Ryan was silent for a long moment, digging up memories he preferred to keep buried. "Once," he finally admitted. "In college, an art student named Catherine. I was 22 and thought I knew everything about life. What happened? My father found out," said Ryan bitterly. "She was from a poor family, a janitor's daughter, not suitable for a Kingsley. He offered her money to leave me and she accepted." Elizabeth was silent, absorbing the information. "Did she love you?" "I thought so, but apparently $50,000 was worth more than anything she felt for me. And after that, you decided never to fall in love again?" Ryan nodded. "I decided that love was a weakness I couldn't afford." "How sad," murmured Elizabeth, "for both of you." They were silent again, each lost in their own painful memories. Ryan looked at Elizabeth, at the way the moon illuminated her profile, highlighting the curve of her cheeks, the delicate shape of her lips. There was something about her that made him want to lower all his defenses, tell her secrets he had never shared with anyone. "Elizabeth," he said suddenly, "tomorrow when we get married, I promise I'll try not to make you lose yourself. I don't know how to be a good husband, but I can try to learn." She turned to him, and Ryan saw tears glistening in her eyes. "Why are you being kind to me?" The question disconcerted him. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because you don't need to be. You've already won. I'm already yours, whether I want to be or not." Ryan felt a sudden, irrational anger. "You are not mine," he said, the words coming out more intensely than intended. "So you are not anyone's property, Elizabeth. Not mine, not your father's, not anyone else's." Elizabeth stared at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected that reaction. Then, slowly, she smiled, the first genuine smile Ryan had seen from her. "Elsie, thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For reminding me that I'm still a person." Ryan extended his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, Elizabeth accepted it, their fingers intertwined, and they remained like that, holding hands in the sand, watching the waves kiss the beach under the moonlight. It was almost romantic, Ryan thought bitterly, almost like a real couple. Tomorrow they would be husband and wife. But that night on the beach in the Maldives, they were just two strangers trying to find humanity in each other. The wedding day dawned with a cloudless sky and waters so crystal clear they looked like liquid glass. Ryan woke up early but couldn't get out of bed for long minutes, staring at the ceiling of the villa while processing what he was about to do. In a few hours, Elizabeth would officially be his wife, and he had no idea how to handle it. He had never imagined getting married out of obligation, much less to a woman who affected him in ways he couldn't understand. The ceremony would be at sunset, on a platform built over the water, especially for the occasion. The only witnesses would be the celebrant and 2 resort staff, keeping everything discreet as Ryan had requested. He spent the day trying to work, but the numbers on the spreadsheets jumbled before his eyes, and he found himself looking at the villa where Elizabeth was getting ready. When the time came, Ryan put on his navy blue suit and walked to the platform, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the wood. The celebrant, a local man of indefinite age and gentle smile, greeted him in English. The sun was beginning to set, turning the ocean into a canvas of impossible colors: gold, orange, pink, blood red. Then he saw her. Elizabeth was walking across the bridge connecting her villa to the platform, and Ryan forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple white silk dress that floated with the breeze, no veil or any ostentation. Her hair was loose, waving in the wind, and she carried a small bouquet of white tropical flowers. But what impressed him most was her expression. There was no resignation or sadness, just an almost ethereal serenity, as if she had found peace with her destiny. When she reached the platform, her eyes met Ryan's, and he saw something different in them. It wasn't love, but it also wasn't the fear he had seen before. It was a kind of silent determination, as if she had made a decision during the night. "You look beautiful," he said, the words coming out in a voice he didn't recognize as his own. "Thank you," she replied, and for the first time, her smile seemed genuine. The ceremony was brief, conducted in English. Ryan heard the words as if they came from far away, too focused on Elizabeth's perfume, on the way the silk dress clung to her body, on the way she responded to the vows with a firm voice that betrayed no hesitation. When it came time to exchange rings, she extended her hand, and Ryan noticed that she no longer trembled. "With this ring I receive you as my wife," said Ryan, sliding the platinum band onto her ring finger. The words were just protocol, but something inside him contracted when he pronounced them. "With this ring I receive you as my husband," Elizabeth replied, placing his ring on. Their hands touched for a moment, and Ryan felt an electric current run up his arm. "You may kiss," announced the celebrant. Ryan hesitated. They had talked about this the night before, a quick kiss just to fulfill the protocol. But when he leaned in to kiss her, when their lips touched, something exploded inside him. It was supposed to be just a superficial touch, but Elizabeth didn't pull away, and Ryan found himself deepening the kiss, his hands moving to frame her face. When they separated, both were breathing irregularly. Elizabeth looked at him with wide eyes, her lips slightly swollen, and Ryan had to use all his willpower not to kiss her again. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Kingsley," said the celebrant, smiling broadly. Mrs. Kingsley. The title sounded strange in Ryan's ears, but there was also something about it that made him want to smile. Elizabeth was his wife now, officially, legally, completely. After the ceremony, they dined on the veranda of the main villa, an intimate meal served by candlelight. Ryan had ordered French champagne, but Elizabeth asked only for water, saying she wanted to keep her mind clear. They talked about trivial things, the taste of the food, the beauty of the place, the colorful fish that could be seen in the illuminated water. It was almost like a normal date, if not for the fact that they were now married. "You're different," Ryan observed during dessert. "More serene." Elizabeth smiled, playing with the ring on her finger. "I spent the night thinking about what you said yesterday, about me not being anyone's property. And I realized that you're right. I may have been forced to marry you, but how I live this marriage is my choice." She faced him directly. "I've decided that I'm going to try to be happy. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'll try." Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. "Elizabeth." "No," she interrupted him gently. "Let me finish. I know this isn't a marriage for love. I know you didn't choose me, just as I didn't choose you. But we're here, and we're married. And we can choose to be miserable, or we can choose to try to build something good together." "Something good?" repeated Ryan. "Friendship, maybe, companionship, mutual respect. It's not love, but it's more than many marriages have." Elizabeth paused. "Would you be willing to try?" Ryan studied her, this woman who continued to surprise him with each conversation. She had been forced into an impossible situation, but instead of surrendering to despair, she was choosing to fight for her own happiness. There was a strength in her that he hadn't seen before, a determination that made him feel small and awed at the same time. "Yes," he finally said. "I would be willing to try." The smile Elizabeth gave him was like sunrise, slow, warm, illuminating her entire face. "Then let's try." After dinner, they walked on the beach, holding hands again. Ryan noticed that she was no longer tense, that her fingers intertwined with his naturally. When they returned to the villa, she stopped at the bedroom door. "Ryan," she said, and there was something different in her voice. "I know this is our wedding night, and I know you have expectations." Ryan's heart raced. He had tried not to think about it, but now that she mentioned it, reality hit him like a wave. She was his wife. He had rights over her that society and law recognized. "Elizabeth, I won't force anything," he said quickly. "We can take all the time we need." She nodded, seeming relieved. "Thank you. I need time." "All the time you need," promised Ryan, and realized he meant it. Elizabeth stood on tiptoe and kissed him on the cheek, a soft, chaste kiss that somehow affected him more than any other he had received. "Good night, husband," she said, and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Ryan alone under the stars, with the taste of possibilities in the salty night air. Ryan couldn't sleep. He sat on the veranda of his villa, drinking whiskey and watching the waves break against the wooden pillars, the hypnotic sound, echoing in the darkness. His mind was a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts, relief that Elizabeth had asked for time, frustration at desiring a woman he barely knew, confusion at feeling something he couldn't name growing in his chest. Around 3 a.m, he decided to walk on the beach to clear his mind. The air was warm and humid, laden with the scent of tropical flowers and sea salt, but when he approached the water, he saw a figure sitting in the sand. Elizabeth was there, still wearing her wedding dress, her bare feet buried in the sand, looking at the horizon where the ocean merged with the starry sky. "You can't sleep either?" he asked, approaching slowly. She turned, and Ryan saw that there were tears in her eyes. "I couldn't stop thinking," she admitted, "about everything that changed today." Ryan sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Regrets?" "No," she answered quickly. "It's not that, it's that, for the first time in a long time, I feel like maybe I did something right, chosen something for myself, even within impossible circumstances." "Explain." Elizabeth buried her fingers in the sand, letting the grains run between her hands. "My entire life was decided by other people. My father chose my schools, my courses, my friendships. He said a woman of our position couldn't afford to make wrong decisions, so I never made any decision at all." Ryan observed her profile illuminated by the moon. "And today I chose to try to be happy. I chose to give you a chance, to give us, to this strange situation we find ourselves in." She faced him. "It was the first real choice I made in my life. And if I don't deserve that chance?" Elizabeth smiled, and there was melancholic wisdom in her eyes. "Everyone deserves a chance, Ryan. Even men who have grown accustomed to being cruel." Her words hit him like a slap. Ryan was silent for a long moment, fighting against the impulse to tell her about the things he had done, the people he had hurt in the name of family business. But there was something about her presence that made him want to be better, cleaner, more worthy. "Elizabeth," he finally said, "there are things about me that you don't know, things that might make you change your mind about giving me a chance. Everyone has secrets, Ryan. Everyone has things they're ashamed of." She touched his arm lightly. "What matters is who you choose to be from now on." "How can you be so generous, after everything?" "Because the alternative is to be bitter, and I refuse to let circumstances turn my heart to stone." Ryan felt something break inside him, a wall he had built long ago beginning to crack. Impulsively, he reached out and touched Elizabeth's face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. She didn't pull away, just closed her eyes and leaned slightly into his touch. "You're extraordinary," he murmured. "I'm not," she replied, but her voice was lower, softer. "I'm just a woman trying to find light in the dark. Then we're two of a kind." They stayed like that for a moment, Ryan caressing her face, Elizabeth allowing herself to be touched. It was intimate without being sexual, tender without being romantic. It was human connection in its purest form. "Ryan," she said, opening her eyes, "may I ask you something?" "Anything. Tell me about your mother." The question caught him off guard. Ryan withdrew his hand, turning to the ocean. "Why do you want to know about her?" "Because I saw the pain in your eyes when you mentioned what your father did to her, and because I believe it's part of what made you who you are." Ryan was silent, for so long that Elizabeth thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with deep sadness. "She was the kindest woman I've ever known. She read to me every night, taught me about art and literature, made me feel the world was a good place." He paused. "My father destroyed her slowly. Betrayal after betrayal, humiliation after humiliation. She lost pieces of herself until there was nothing left." "Where is she now?" "In a private clinic in Vermont. She doesn't recognize me anymore. She lives in a world where she's still 20 years old and waiting for the great love of her life." Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I swore I would never do that to a woman, never allow someone to become my weakness, as she was for my father." "But you're not your father," Elizabeth said softly. "Aren't I?" Ryan laughed bitterly. "Look at us, Elizabeth. I forced you into a marriage you didn't want, exactly as my father would." "You didn't force me," she corrected. "Circumstances forced us. And unlike your father, you're here, caring about my feelings, giving me choices." Ryan stared at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "How can you have such faith in someone you barely know?" "Because I recognize pain when I see it. And people who feel deep pain rarely inflict it on others for pleasure." Elizabeth touched his hand. "You're wounded, Ryan, but being wounded doesn't make you a monster." Ryan intertwined his fingers with hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the delicacy of her bones. "You scare me," he admitted. "Why?" "Because you make me want to be better, and I don't know if I'm capable of that." Elizabeth smiled, and it was a smile full of tenderness that made Ryan's heart race. "Then let's find out together." They stayed on the beach until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, sharing memories and fears, building the first foundations of something that could one day become real. When the sun began to paint the sky golden, Ryan helped Elizabeth to her feet, and together they walked back to the villa. At the door to her room, Elizabeth hesitated. "Ryan." "Yes?" "Thank you for listening to me, for seeing me. Thank you for letting me." She stood on tiptoe and kissed him softly on the lips, a chaste kiss but full of promise. "Good night, husband. Good night, wife." As he watched the door close behind her, Ryan realized that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The following days in the Maldives were like a dream suspended in time. Ryan and Elizabeth established a delicate routine: breakfast together on the terrace, dives in the crystal-clear sea, long walks on the beach at sunset. They talked about books, art, philosophy, discovering surprising affinities. Ryan was impressed by Elizabeth's intellectual depth, while she was surprised by the sensitivity he hid behind the mask of the ruthless businessman. On the fifth night, Ryan woke to a muffled cry coming from Elizabeth's room. Without thinking, he rushed out and found the door ajar. She was in bed, struggling against tangled sheets, murmuring in Italian between tears. It was clearly a nightmare, and Ryan hesitated only a second before approaching. "Elizabeth," he called softly, touching her shoulder. "Wake up, it's just a dream." She woke with a start, eyes wide with terror, breathing heavily. When she saw him, she began to cry more intensely, and Ryan acted on instinct. sitting on the edge of the bed and pulling her into his arms. She clung to him like an anchor, her small body trembling against his chest. "Shh, it's okay," murmured Ryan, stroking her hair. "You're safe." "I was back in that house," Elizabeth sobbed against his chest. "My father was handing me over to men I didn't know, and I couldn't scream, I couldn't move." Ryan felt a fierce anger burn in his veins. "That will never happen, never." "How can you be sure?" "Because I'll protect you," he said, the words coming out with a conviction that surprised him. "I promise, Elizabeth, no one will ever hurt you again." She looked at him through her tears, and Ryan saw something change in her eyes. Slowly she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing his jaw. "You've changed," she murmured. "What?" "A week ago, you were a dangerous stranger. Now you're my husband." The word husband left her lips like a caress, and Ryan felt something explode in his chest. Before he could think, he bent down and kissed her. This time it wasn't a chaste or protocol kiss. It was pure need, months of tension and repressed desire finally finding release. Elizabeth responded, with a passion that left him dizzy. Her hands buried themselves in his hair, pulling him closer, and Ryan moaned against her lips. When they separated, both were breathing heavily. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice hoarse, "if you don't want—" "I want to," she interrupted, her eyes shining in the half-light. "For the first time in my life, I truly want to." What happened next was different from anything Ryan had experienced. There was no rush, no conquest. There were just two wounded hearts finding healing in each other, two lonely souls merging in the darkness perfumed by the sea breeze. When Elizabeth whispered his name in the most intimate moment, Ryan felt all his defenses crumble definitively. Afterward, they lay entwined, Elizabeth with her head on Ryan's chest, her fingers tracing lazy circles on his skin. Ryan caressed, her hair still processing what had happened. He had made love before, but had never felt this devastating connection, this sense that he had found a part of himself he didn't know was lost. "Ryan," Elizabeth said softly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For making me feel chosen instead of taken." Ryan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Thank you for choosing me." They fell asleep like that, and Ryan had the first peaceful dreams in years, but reality came knocking 3 days later. Ryan was reading emails when his phone rang. It was his assistant in New York, with news that made his blood freeze. "Mr. Kingsley, we have a problem. Marianne Voss is spreading rumors about your marriage. She's saying that Mrs. Elizabeth is just a useless virgin with no social connections, that you married out of pity. Marianne Voss, his ex-mistress, a powerful woman in real estate who had never taken the end of their relationship well." Ryan clenched his fists, anger boiling in his veins. "Where is she doing this?" "At the elite New York dinners. Apparently she'll be present at the Amber Foundation event tonight. Many of our business partners will be there." Ryan hung up the phone and stood still for a long moment, fighting against the fury threatening to consume him. Elizabeth appeared on the terrace, wearing a white dress that fluttered in the breeze, a radiant smile on her face. "Who was it?" she asked, but the smile disappeared when she saw his expression. "Work," said Ryan, trying to control his voice. "We have to return to New York." "Today?" "Today." Elizabeth approached, placing her hand on his arm. "What happened?" Ryan hesitated, not wanting to contaminate her happiness with the cruelties of the real world. But Elizabeth wasn't a child who needed to be protected from the truth. "My ex-mistress is spreading malicious rumors about you. About us." Elizabeth's face paled. "What kind of rumors?" "That you are inadequate. That I married you out of pity." Ryan saw the pain cross her eyes, quickly followed by something more dangerous, determination. "Then let's go home," she said, her voice firm. "And let's show her, and everyone, who I really am." Ryan studied her, this woman who continued to surprise him with her strength. "Are you sure it can be brutal?" "I'm a Kingsley now, Elizabeth replied, and there was steel in her voice. "And Kingsley women don't run from fights." Ryan smiled, feeling a wave of pride and admiration. "No, they certainly don't." They packed quickly, and as the private jet prepared to take off, Ryan held Elizabeth's hand. "Whatever happens in New York, we face it together," he said. "Together," she agreed, squeezing his hand. But they both knew that paradise had ended. Now it was time to face the real world and all the demons that came with it. New York welcomed them with its characteristic brutality, grey sky, hellish traffic, and the suffocating weight of reality. The Kingsley mansion in the Hamptons had never seemed so imposing and cold to Ryan's eyes. Elizabeth was silent during the journey from the airport, observing the city through the car's bulletproof windows, her fingers nervously playing with her wedding ring. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said, as they passed through Manhattan. "And crueler," Ryan replied somberly. When they arrived at the mansion, Ryan introduced Elizabeth to the staff. She was polite and kind to everyone, but Ryan could feel the tension in her shoulders, the way she stayed close to him as if he were an anchor. The Kingsley family home was intimidating even for someone who had grown up in high society. 16 bedrooms, immense halls decorated with European art, formal gardens that seemed straight out of Versailles. "This will be our room," said Ryan, opening the door to the master suite. Elizabeth entered slowly, observing the antique furniture, the huge windows overlooking the gardens, the king-size bed that dominated the environment. "It's beautiful," she said, but her voice sounded distant. "Elizabeth, are you okay?" She turned to him, and Ryan saw unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "In the Maldives, I almost forgot that our marriage wasn't real, that it started as a business transaction." Ryan felt as if he had been shot in the chest. "Elizabeth." "No," she raised, her hand interrupting him. "Let me speak. I know that what happened between us was real. At least it was for me, but now seeing all this wealth, remembering who you really are and how I got here, it's hard not to feel like an imposter." Ryan approached, taking her hands in his. "You're not an imposter, you're my wife." "Am I?" she asked, pure vulnerability stamped on her face. "Or am I just the debtor's daughter you were forced to accept?" The question hit him like a slap. Ryan realized that despite everything they had shared, Elizabeth still carried the wound of how their marriage had begun. And the truth was that he didn't know how to heal it, because he himself was still trying to understand what he felt for her. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I know we started wrong. I know the circumstances were terrible. But what I feel for you now, that's real. That's mine." Before she could respond, Ryan's phone rang. It was his assistant again. "Mr. Kingsley, the situation is getting worse. Marianne has convinced 3 of our largest investors to attend the charity dinner tonight. She's planning to publicly humiliate Mrs. Elizabeth." Ryan clenched his fists. "What kind of humiliation?" "Apparently she wants to force Mrs. Elizabeth to speak in public, knowing she's shy. She wants to expose her as inadequate to be a Kingsley." "Son of a bitch," muttered Ryan. "Will you attend?" Ryan looked at Elizabeth, who had heard the entire conversation. She was pale, but there was determination in her eyes. "Yes," said Ryan, "we will attend." After he hung up, Elizabeth approached him. "Ryan, maybe it's better if you go alone. I don't want to cause problems for your business." "No," he said firmly. "We'll go together and we'll show that witch and everyone else that you are much more than they imagine." Elizabeth smiled sadly. "And if I'm not? If I really am just a woman too simple for this world?" Ryan pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "Then to hell with them. I prefer a woman with a pure heart to all the calculating socialites in New York." That afternoon, Ryan took Elizabeth shopping for a dress for the event. She protested against the luxury of the boutique on Fifth Avenue, but he insisted. When she came out of the fitting room wearing a black silk dress that accentuated every curve of her body, Ryan forgot how to breathe. "It's perfect," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's too expensive," protested Elizabeth. "You're worth every penny." At the salon, while Elizabeth was having her hair and makeup done, Ryan called his lawyer. "I want you to investigate Marianne Vos," he said. "All suspicious transactions, all questionable schemes. She wants war, she'll get war." When it was time to leave for the event, Elizabeth descended the mansion's staircase like an apparition. The black dress moved like water around her body. Her hair was tied in an elegant bun that exposed her delicate neck, and the makeup dramatically enhanced her brown eyes. She wore the Kingsley family jewels, a diamond necklace that had belonged to Ryan's mother. "My God," murmured Ryan, when he saw her. "Do I look presentable?" she asked nervously. "You look devastating." In the car on the way to the event, Elizabeth was silent, her hands clasped in her lap. Ryan covered her hands with his. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," he said. "Just be yourself. And if myself isn't enough." Ryan stopped the car on the shoulder and turned to her. "Elizabeth, listen to me. You're the bravest woman I know. You faced an arranged marriage with dignity, transformed an impossible situation into something beautiful, and made me feel things I thought I would never feel. If these people can't see how extraordinary you are, then they're blind." Elizabeth looked at him with tears in her eyes. "How do you always manage to say exactly what I need to hear?" "Because I see you," he answered simply. "I really see you." She leaned in and kissed him, a soft kiss, but full of gratitude, and something deeper, that neither of them was ready to name. "Ready?" Ryan asked when they arrived at the hotel where the event was taking place. Elizabeth took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, but was full of fierce courage. "Ready." They got out of the mule car hand in hand, and Ryan felt a fierce pride grow in his chest. His wife was about to face the wolves of New York high society, and she would do it with the grace of a queen. The plaza was dazzling that night, with its golden halls illuminated by crystal chandeliers and decorated with arrangements of white, flowers that cost more than many people earned in a month. New York's elite had gathered for the Amber Foundation charity dinner, all dressed in their finest clothes and their most fake smiles. Ryan felt the tension grow in his shoulders as he and Elizabeth crossed the main hall, all eyes turning to them. "Breathe," he whispered in Elizabeth's ear, feeling how she clung to his arm. "I'm trying," she replied, a forced smile on her face. Ryan knew that cruel world where reputations were destroyed with venomous whispers and where vulnerability was seen as weakness. But seeing Elizabeth there, dignified and brave despite her fear, he felt a fierce protection burn in his chest. She didn't belong to that world of vipers, but if they wanted to attack her, they would have to go through him first. "Ryan, darling." The chap, voice sweet as poisoned honey, made Ryan turn. Marianne Vos was approaching with a predatory smile, wearing a red dress that left little to the imagination. At 40, she was still a beautiful woman, but there was a hardness in her eyes that age had accentuated. "Marianne," Ryan greeted coldly. "And this must be the famous Elizabeth," said Marianne, examining Elizabeth from head to toe as if she were cattle at market. "How interesting." "Interesting," repeated Elizabeth, her voice calm but with a note of steel that Ryan had never heard before. "Well, you're very different from the women Ryan usually chooses," said Marianne with a crystalline laugh. "Simpler, let's say." Ryan stepped forward, anger boiling in his veins, but Elizabeth placed her hand on his arm, stopping him. "You're right," said Elizabeth with a serene smile. "I am very simple. I never had the sophistication necessary to share a married man with his wife, for example." Marianne's smile faltered. Ryan looked at Elizabeth with surprise and admiration. She had just publicly reminded her that Marianne had been his mistress while he was engaged to another woman years ago. "How amusing," said Marianne, her voice colder now. "I hope you enjoy yourself tonight. I heard there will be speeches. Perhaps you could share with us what it's like to be rescued." "Rescued?" repeated Elizabeth, tilting her head. "Well, we all know that your father was in serious financial difficulties. It was very chivalrous of Ryan to save you from ruin." Ryan felt his blood boil. Marianne was publicly insinuating that Elizabeth had been sold to save her family. But before he could react, Elizabeth stepped forward. "Indeed," she said, her voice sweet but with a cutting tone. "It's wonderful to be rescued by a man who values loyalty and honesty above all, especially after he learned that some women are disposable." This time it was Marianne who paled. Elizabeth had just reminded her that Ryan had unceremoniously dismissed her when he tired of her. "Well," said Marianne, her smile now forced, "let's see how you fare during the evening." She walked away, but Ryan could see that she was planning something. He pulled Elizabeth to a more secluded corner. "You were amazing," he said, admiration evident in his voice. "But she won't give up easily." "I know," replied Elizabeth. "She'll try to publicly humiliate me, won't she?" "Probably." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Then let's be ready." During dinner, Ryan watched Marianne working the table, whispering in the ears of important investors, planting seeds of doubt about Elizabeth. He could see the plan forming. She was orchestrating something to put Elizabeth in an embarrassing situation in front of everyone. The opportunity came during the speeches. The foundation's president was talking about the importance of supporting young talent when Marianne stood up. "Excuse the interruption," she said with a sweet smile. "But since we're talking about supporting talent, how about hearing from our newest addition to New York society? Elizabeth Kingsley, I'm sure everyone would love to hear you talk about your transition to life in New York." The hall fell silent. Ryan felt his blood freeze. It was a perfect trap. If Elizabeth refused to speak, she would seem rude. If she accepted, Marianne was counting on her shyness to make her stutter and humiliate herself. Elizabeth rose slowly, and Ryan saw her hands trembling slightly. But when she looked at him, there was determination in her eyes. "Of course," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "It would be my pleasure." She walked to the small stage, each step calculated and graceful. When she reached the microphone, she paused, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Marshall Kingsley, and it's true that I'm new to New York society. It's also true that I come from a family that faced financial difficulties." Her voice was clear, without a trace of nervousness. "But what I've recently learned is that sometimes, from the most difficult situations, the greatest blessings are born." Ryan felt his heart race. Where was she going with this? "You see, I could have met my husband at a party, at a dinner, at any social event. But instead, I met him in a moment of total vulnerability. He saw me at my worst moment when I had nothing to offer except who I really am, and he chose to love me anyway." The hall was in absolute silence. Ryan felt tears catch in his throat. "How many of us can say we are loved for who we really are, not for what we possess?" Elizabeth continued. "How many can say their partner, 'I chose them when they were in ruins'? I can, and for that I am the luckiest woman in this room." She paused, looking directly at Marianne. "Because true love isn't born of convenience or opportunity. It's born from the ability to see beauty even in chaos, to find strength even in weakness, and I found that in Ryan Kingsley." She turned her gaze to Ryan, and he saw pure, genuine love in her eyes. "So yes, I was rescued, but not from poverty. I was rescued from loneliness. I was rescued from a life without purpose, and in return I hope I've rescued my husband from the same thing." The hall erupted in applause. Ryan stood up, eyes full of tears, and began walking toward the stage. When Elizabeth descended, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her in front of everyone, not caring about protocol or consequences. "I love you," he whispered against her lips, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I love you too," she replied, and Ryan felt as if the whole world had changed with those words. When they separated, they saw Marianne leaving the hall, defeated and humiliated. Elizabeth had transformed her trap into a declaration of love that no one present would ever forget. 6 months after that night at the Yay Plaza, Ryan woke to the sound of laughter coming from the garden. Through the bedroom window, he saw Elizabeth kneeling among her beloved rose bushes, her hands covered in soil, animatedly talking with Mrs. Carmen, the family gardener. The morning sun illuminated her brown hair, and there was a lightness in her movements that didn't exist when he first met her. She had transformed not just the gardens of the mansion, but the entire atmosphere of the house. Where there was once only cold elegance, now there was life pulsing in every corner. Elizabeth had brought music, books, laughter, and a humanity that Ryan didn't even know he was missing. She had organized intimate dinners for true friends instead of the social performances he was used to, transformed one of the halls into a library, and created a special corner where she cultivated herbs for teas that she prepared when he came, home stressed from work. But the most profound transformation had happened within himself. Ryan barely recognized the man he had been. That ruthless businessman who saw people as chess pieces was giving way to someone who had learned to value real connections, simple moments, true love. "Good morning, husband," said Elizabeth when he came down to the garden, planting a soft kiss on his lips. She still had soil on her cheeks, and Ryan smiled as he wiped it off with his thumb. "Good morning, wife. What are you and Mrs. Carman conspiring about?" "It's not a conspiracy," Elizabeth protested with a mischievous smile. "It's a surprise." "What kind of surprise?" "You'll find out tonight." Ryan sighed dramatically. "You know I hate surprises." "You used to hate surprises," Elizabeth corrected. "Now you just pretend to hate them because you think it's expected of you." He laughed because she was right. Elizabeth knew him better than he knew himself sometimes, saw through all his masks and defenses with an ease that should frighten him, but instead made him feel completely known and loved. During breakfast, Elizabeth was more animated than usual, with an almost electric energy that made her constantly fidget with her hands. Ryan watched her with amusement and curiosity, trying to guess what she was planning. "Are you sure you don't want to give me a hint?" he asked. "Absolutely," she replied, stealing a piece of his toast. "But I can say it has to do with a promise you made to me." Ryan racked his memory, trying to remember a specific promise. In recent months, he had promised Elizabeth many things: never to travel without her, always to listen when she wanted to talk about her books, to help her find ways to use her education for charitable work. The day passed slowly, with Ryan trying to concentrate on work, but constantly distracted thinking about Elizabeth's surprise. At 6 in the evening, she appeared in his home office, wearing a simple blue dress that enhanced her eyes. "Ready?" she asked. "For what?" "For your surprise." She led him by the hand to the back garden, where Ryan stopped abruptly. There was a table set for two under the pergola covered with jasmine, candles lit despite it still being daylight, and white rose petals scattered on the ground. It was romantic, but that wasn't what had left him breathless. It was the third person waiting for them. "Mom," whispered Ryan, his voice breaking. Helen Kingsley was sitting in a wheelchair, more fragile than he remembered, but her blue eyes were clear and focused. She looked at him and smiled, a smile he hadn't seen in more than 15 years. "My boy," she said, extending her arms. Ryan fell to his knees beside the chair, embracing his mother, while tears he couldn't control streamed down his face. Elizabeth had achieved the impossible. She had brought his mother back to him. "How?" he asked, looking at Elizabeth through his tears. "I talked to her doctors. They said she has moments of lucidity, especially in familiar environments with people she loves. I arranged for her to come have dinner with us tonight." Ryan couldn't stop crying. He had convinced himself that his mother was lost forever, that the disease had taken everything she had been. But there she was, fragile but present, looking at him with maternal love that he thought he would never experience again. "She talked about you the whole way here," Elizabeth said softly. "About how you were when you were little, about how proud she was of the man you've become." During dinner, Helen told stories of Ryan's childhood that Elizabeth listened to with delight, and Ryan rediscovered pieces of himself that he had buried, along with the painful memories of his family. His mother asked about Elizabeth, and when Ryan explained how they had met and fallen in love, she held Elizabeth's hand and smiled. "You brought my son back," said Helen. "I can see it in his eyes. He wasn't lost, just hidden. But you found him?" When it was time for Helen to return to the clinic, she held Ryan and Elizabeth's hands. together. Be happy, she said. Life is too short for anything but true love. After she left, Ryan and Elizabeth were alone in the garden, holding hands among the candles that still burned. "Thank you," said Ryan, his voice still hoarse with emotion. "I don't know how you managed." "I knew you needed to say goodbye properly," said Elizabeth, "and I wanted her to know that you found someone who loves you for the amazing man you are." Ryan pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the gratitude and love he felt. "How was I so lucky to find you?" "We found each other," Elizabeth corrected, "and we chose each other every day since then." "And we'll keep choosing each other," promised Ryan, "for the rest of our lives." They danced alone in the garden, under the stars, and among the scent of the roses that Elizabeth cultivated with so much love. Ryan thought about how his life had changed, from a man who believed that love was weakness to someone who knew that love was the only thing that truly mattered. Elizabeth had come into his life as part of a business transaction, but had become the author of his redemption. She had taught him that being vulnerable wasn't weakness, that loving deeply wasn't dangerous, that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unlikely beginnings. "I love you," he murmured against her. "Hair, I love you too," she replied, "forever." And there in the garden, perfumed by the roses Elizabeth had planted, under the starry New York sky, Ryan knew he had found his home. Not in the imposing mansion or billion-dollar businesses, but in the arms of the woman who had transformed his darkness into light, his loneliness into love, his life into something worthy of being lived. They had begun as strangers united by necessity, but became soulmates chosen by love.